being here bright and early. It's not so early, I guess. It's good to start at 10:15, right? Not those 8 o'clock conference workshops. So I'm Pam Blumenthal. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of Affordable Rents for College Students program of College Housing Northwest. And we're going to get started. I'm going to start with our panel. We're not all going to be up here at the same time. Many of us are down at the table here, but we're going to start with some introductions. And then I'll kind of go over what we're going to talk about today. And one of the things I'm going to ask our panelists to say when they introduce themselves is if they can remember an amount of rent that they paid when they were in college. So I'm going to start. I lived in a few places in college, but I remember my last apartment was a studio apartment and I paid $185 a month. That was in Eugene. That was a while ago. But I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Sturley. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the director of real estate and development at College Housing Northwest. I went to college in Southern Illinois. I think I paid $150 for like a one room in a 4-bedroom house. Bring this down.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can go next. Yeah, I can. Hello, yeah, everybody can hear me. My name is Javier Gomez. I'm a PCC student and also I'm an RX resident. I paid $600 right now because I'm still going to college, right? I'm paying $600.
Hey, good morning. I'm Lauren Smith, she, her, hers. I'm the Dean of Student Belonging and Wellbeing at Portland Community College. I tried to remember, this was a tough memory for me. University of Oregon, I lived in the dorms my first year. Second year, we got a really, really tiny house with 2 girlfriends. I think we each paid $500, I think, to live there. So I'll have to check, but nice to see everybody.
Hello, my name is Matt Rasmussen. I use he, him pronouns. I oversee the Youth Experiencing Homelessness program, which is housed within the Department of Human Services. And I was thinking about this too. When I work a lot of times with young people who are unhoused, housing unstable, and I look at myself and I realize I have no idea what I paid because I had the luxury of being able to go to a private school where I lived on campus all 4 years, and it was all bundled into one thing that my parents took care of. And so it kind of just shows to me the need to like check our privilege sometimes when it comes to talking about housing. It was because I don't have any idea what that was because it was all in something that went to my parents' address and I just lived. So that's something that our kids don't have the luxury of.
Thanks, everybody. So we're going to get started here, and I just want to give you kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you a little bit of history and context of framing this issue around student housing insecurity. We're going to start there. We're going to talk about, Ryan's going to talk a bit about the College Housing Northwest, which is our organization, which is a nonprofit housing organization focused on college students. And then we're going to have Javier tell his perspective, living in our property and being part of our new program, Affordable Rents for College Students. And then Lauren is a partner with us at Portland Community College, and she's going to talk about housing issues for college students and PCC. And then Matt is a funding partner and is supporting youth in our programs and going to talk about the efforts of DHS in this arena. So, and we're going to have time. We're going to stop at different times for you to ask questions. So we'll hopefully have time at the end as well, but there'll be little breaks in the middle for you all to ask some questions. So the problem definition is here. For many people, including myself, give a little background on myself. I've been at College Housing Northwest since January. Previously, I was at PCC for 16 years, and I did a variety of administrative roles there. I was one of the roles I was in was the interim dean of students at the Sylvania campus. And it was really, that was in 2018 that I did that. And up until that point, I'd been at PCC quite a long time, and I didn't quite understand that college students could be homeless. It was really in my dean role that I discovered students were sleeping on campus, sleeping in their cars, couch surfing. And I really learned how how challenging it is to be a college student, obviously, if you don't have a secure place to live. So this has been an issue that has grown as housing issues and homelessness in our community has grown. We, the rising costs of education, stagnant wages, our students are not what people think of typical college students, right? The average age of college students now is 26, I believe. So this idea that students leave home at 18 and go live in the dorms, like Matt was talking about, that's not the typical college student at this point. And then obviously a decreasing supply of affordable housing. And you're going to learn from Ryan that college students are not eligible for a lot of affordable housing programs. I think the other thing here, and you all, I'm sure, know a lot about this, what people think causes homelessness. And this is a survey of Americans and believing that individual problems and self-efficacy are the reason that people are homeless. And of course, we know that there's a lot of institutional and structural issues that have led to chronic homelessness, that lead to housing insecurity, that lead for our students to have challenges getting their first apartment. There are a lot of structural issues, but the narrative out there is that it is really the individual. And I think especially when you think about college students, people don't think, well, you shouldn't even be in college if you can't have a place to live, right? Like that's not what college is for. College is for people who can, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that whole thing. And we know that underrepresented students are disproportionately impacted by homelessness, by structural issues in higher education that are keeping them out of completion and access to higher ed. So this is just a couple of quotes. Some of these slides are from a paper that we put out in June, which focuses on kind of the historic issues around housing in college students, and that will be available if people want to see it later. But I think this reality that college students, as I mentioned, are living in shelters, in their cars, and trying to go to college is a new idea for a lot of people, and we want to highlight that here. And some of the reasons why. So from 1989 to 2016, college costs increased almost eight times faster than wages. So you can see in this as well that what in 1987 to 88, what the cost of tuition, fees, and room and board would be compared to 2019 and 2020. And you can, as we're in this loan forgiveness conversation now, you can see how students are borrowing at an amazing rate to just be able to get to a degree. And we know that the payoff for getting a degree is quite impactful, and we're going to talk about that as well. So you know why people are doing this, but it is really all of this is being put on the student. They're getting an incredible debt, and many of them often leave college without a credential, so they have the debt and they don't have the benefit of the credential. I think I've covered this already in a previous slide, but universities and community colleges have a lot of limitations around funding. They're not getting funding to support students with basic needs. That's changing a little bit, but there are community colleges don't have housing, and that's one of the things that College Housing Northwest is trying to do, is partner with community colleges to provide housing opportunities. It isn't typically something that community colleges have gotten in the business of, but we're working on that. And all of this really requires a very specialized, focused approach to make sure that we're supporting the students who need it the most. So we're going to refer to, has anybody heard of the Hope Center? I'm used to, okay, a couple of you. So the Hope Center is a research organization out of Temple University. And the founding person, Sarah Goldrick Robb, wrote a book 8 to 10 years ago called Paying the Price. And it really highlighted the issues of food and housing insecurity for college students, some things that have really not been elevated to the level it had. And what happened with that book is, at least in Oregon, I believe every college campus has a food pantry. I know every campus at PCC has one. And so food insecurity was the first thing to really, people reacted very strongly to that, knowing that students were not eating sometimes maybe one meal a day in the surveying that was happening nationally. So houselessness was also part of that, but it's a much tougher nut to crack, right? It's a much more expensive issue. It's much more personalized to the location. So students are facing housing insecurity. Again, these rates are at 2-year institutions, 23% of college students, and at 4 years, 21%. And locally, there've been this, Hope Center does surveys nationally every year, Lauren? Yeah. And so this is a 2019 survey of Oregon, 8,100 students in 14 Oregon community colleges. 41% responded that they were food insecure in the prior 30 days. 52% were housing insecure, and 20% homeless. So again, those numbers are, I remember first realizing this isn't just a handful of students. This is significant and impactful, obviously to the students themselves, but to us all, to our community. If students are not, if their basic needs aren't being met, they're not going to be staying in school. They're not going to be achieving credentials. They're going to be accruing a lot of debt. These problems are going to roll on and lead to more problems. So I'm going to hand this to Ryan to talk about this next part.
Thanks, Pam. There isn't a lot of research around what the actual impact of housing insecurity and houselessness is on educational outcomes. Like Pam said, I mean, the Hope Center started relatively recently, and some of this data, I mean, we first saw it in this 2019 report was the first time we really saw kind of localized data around what the levels of housing insecurity and houselessness were in Oregon. This is a study done by the Minnesota Office of Higher Ed, and it's basically just comparing housing secure and housing insecure students. And you can see, fourth year persistence rates are about half for housing insecure students versus housing secure students. And completion rates are about a third. So really, really impactful what being housing insecure or houseless, what the impact is on actual educational outcomes. And this is just a quote from a UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools report. So housing insecurity impacts institutions as well. Homeless students report lower GPAs, are less likely to persist in their studies, and drop out at higher rates than their peers. I'm gonna let you talk about that. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think this slide speaks for itself that, and it's common sense, right? That if folks are getting a college education, they're going to be contributing more. Lifetime earnings are higher, higher taxes paid, more. I don't think this is on here, but I know that, oh yeah, results in better health outcomes. There's all kinds of impacts that are positively affected by achieving a degree, a certificate, even a 2-year degree. It's all exponentially impacts outcomes. And then the public impact, and reduced debt, increased likelihood of graduation, and higher lifetime earnings. We talked about that. And I think that when we're talking about systems and how much it costs to house folks that have been chronically homeless for years compared to what we could invest in college students, we'll talk a little bit about that cost differential, but it's quite significant. So it's the old adage, you pay now, you pay later, right? Okay, and now I'm going to let Ryan talk a little bit about College Housing Northwest. Oh, sure. I'll take a couple of questions if you want before Ryan starts. Does anybody have any questions about what we've presented so far? Yes. We need to get her the mic. We're going to get you a mic because the folks that are at online can't hear unless it's mic'd.
I was just wondering if there are any efforts to do a news study. Saw that those numbers were from 2019, and those were, I feel like I see those similar numbers across different areas of the country from time to time, and it's always so surprising, even though I know that this is what's happening. But considering what's been going on the last couple of years, wondering if you have an idea of what's happening currently.
So we also did the Hope Center survey again in 2021, and then we're preparing to do it again now, to your exact point, right? We know that COVID, the pandemic, and not to mention the happenings of the last couple of years have only exacerbated. So I'm really curious what that will show. And then there's also within community colleges, there's a survey called the Community College Survey of Student Engagement, which also connects to housing, basic needs, transportation. Mental health is another one that is constantly on my mind too. So we are getting more recent data, and it's showing trends, as you're kind of alluding to, that this is growing, right?
Can we get access to the results of that survey by joining a listserv or newsletter?
Sure. I'm going to share a few of the more recent data, and then I'm open to sharing what we've got so you have access to it. Yeah.
I would add to that. So Portland State University has the Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative that many of you may be aware of, and they did a study of PSU students, also in 2019, but they haven't had the funding to kind of do a new updated study. So I think a lot of this is there is a real need for additional funding to, gather more data on this issue.
Any other questions? Or yes, in the back. Oh, Brian's going to run a mic to you.
So the question I had is, I heard years ago, and I don't know if this is still accurate or if it was ever accurate, that they had put a thing in place that for people with like Section 8 or those housing funding along those lines, that you could not go to school and have that because people had taken out a bunch of loans and then weren't able to pay that back, and it affected. Is that still in place?
Yes, Ryan's going to talk about this in a little bit, but just briefly, full-time college students, unless I believe they're veterans or maybe former foster youth, are not eligible for Section 8. Also, they can't live in LIHTC funded affordable housing. So Ryan's going to go into detail about policy in a minute.
There definitely are some exceptions for full-time students being able to access them, but we see that a majority of students, even if they are houseless or housing insecure, fall into are not eligible to receive LIHTC, live in LIHTC properties or receive Section 8.
Will you go over if they already have existing housing and then they end up going to school, how that impacts them? So like if they're a parent and then they decide to go to school and they already have that, will they lose their housing? I mean, have you looked into that at all?
I'm not actually sure because we're a student housing organization, so we don't operate LIHTC, funded buildings. So I might look to someone who, in the audience who is an affordable housing provider that utilizes LIHTC to say what happens when someone who wasn't a student becomes a full-time student and what the impact is.
So I'm Michelle. I work for Benton County and I run a rental assistance program for our behavioral health. And I work very closely with Len Benton Housing Authority. So part of what we do in our case management is assist individuals with disabilities to go to school and better their lives and eventually become self-sufficient. And individuals who, weren't going to school, but were already on Section 8 or in project-based housing, the only thing that counts towards their income are loans. If they only get grants, then that's not counted. But once they start getting loans, then that ends up on their income, and that could jeopardize their Section 8.
I'm Glenda with the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. Does this affect veterans with their veterans VASH housing?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think
so they would be able to.
Yeah,
to
I think
it.
veterans are exempt.
Yeah,
from,
the VASH program is totally different than Section 8 program.
I think so. Yeah. So we're going to move on, and we'll have time for more questions. Ryan, I don't know if you want to.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about College Housing Northwest. So we were created in the late 60s by Portland State University students, basically as a response to the urban renewal that was happening in the South Auditorium District. It was essentially a lot of the existing housing for Portland State students at that time was being demolished to make way for urban renewal projects. And so some students in an urban studies class lobbied the legislature at the time and were granted a few buildings, which they then ran in a kind of a co-op model. Yeah, thanks. Since then, we've basically operated under a model of providing more workforce rent levels for students with enhanced support services as well. Our rents are typically between 60 to 80% AMI. And I think one of the biggest things we do is lower barriers to entry for college students. So we have really low security deposits. We don't require previous rental history. We don't require guarantors. And I mean, I think some of those are huge barriers for college students. So we're a property owner, developer, manager. So the last project we developed was a 141 unit project next to Portland State University. And then we also created the Affordable Rents for College Students program.
Okay, you gonna sit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold it a little closer.
A little closer. Sorry. So a little bit about the policy barriers that we've seen, at least on. We talked a little bit about Section 8. So this chart on the right talks about who is eligible if you are a student to receive Section 8 vouchers. And then I think this is the critical one for us. Like we looked at developing properties using the low-income housing tax credit, and basically the issue is full-time students are only eligible to live in LIHTC properties if they meet one of these criteria. And this is just kind of showing what the different student rules are for LIHTC and then for other HUD-funded properties. And then I think another issue is, related to state and local resources is a lot of the gap funding is focused on providing units at deeply affordable rents. So the Metro Affordable Housing Bond measure, you can see here what the unit production targets are. And so if you don't have access to LIHTC, it's very difficult to hit these targets.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about ARCS, which is a program that College Housing Northwest started in 2020. And it was how I got connected to the organization. I was representing PCC at the time. It was the beginning of the pandemic. We'd already been talking for, a few months about student housing insecurity and trying to elevate this issue and bring colleges and nonprofits together. and create a summit, which we ended up doing in the fall of 2020. We did a virtual summit to talk to stakeholders about student housing insecurity. But College Housing Northwest decided to invest $75,000 to subsidize students' rents, and we created 20 spots where we were subsidizing 50% of the rent. And this is the ARCS program, and Javier's going to talk about it in a little bit because he is one of our students. And for example, if we have apartments that range in price from $1,000 to $1,400 a month, let's say, student would be paying half, be responsible for half that. And so we're trying to, students are only eligible for that program if they're referred by one of our partners, and the partners are, there's still some more partners up there that aren't on there yet. We're partnered with NEA now and with Clackamas Community College as well. And we have a coordinator of the program, and students can be referred. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. As Ryan said, all of our students that come in to live at College Housing Northwest have no rental history are needed, no proof of income. For our ARC student, there's no deposit. For regular College Housing Northwest students, it's only a $500 deposit. We don't take first and last month's rent, nothing like that. For ARC students, there's no application fee, reduced utility and Wi-Fi depending on the building you live in. One of our buildings, the newest one, all utilities are included. And then we also have eviction prevention programs. We really are working with students to make sure that if they can't pay rent 1 month, that we're working with them to figure that out. We have an emergency fund. And then the personalized support is really key. We have a partnership with New Avenues for Youth. Some of our students are getting case management through them or through the college that is referring them. I also have a coordinator who meets with students monthly to check in to see how they're doing. We don't want to be surprised by things coming up and students suddenly not being able to pay their rent or mental health issues that come up. So we're really working in a very holistic way. Students have to be enrolled at least half time. I think most of our students are enrolled full time. And I mentioned our partnerships. This has really been key to create this coalition of folks working towards stable housing for college students. Right now, we're housing almost 55 students. We started with 20. My goal is by the end of 2023 to have 100 spots. College Housing Northwest, we have about 600 apartments, and we're working on acquiring properties that are closer to the community colleges as well, to really be able to meet the need of college students there. We have a new partnership with DHS, which Matt's going to talk about, and we're targeting partnering with culturally specific nonprofits. And we're also, are you familiar with Project Turnkey through Oregon Community Foundation? We've entered into phase 2 in that project as well. We collaborate with our partners around fundraising. So College Housing Northwest is a nonprofit, but has not been a fundraising nonprofit. And that's part of my role, is to come in and do fundraising to support the subsidies. We're also partnering with the colleges and government relations and connecting to legislators and talking about this issue with really whoever is interested and will listen. We're doing public relations work with the colleges and the partners, and advocacy work. And any questions about what Ryan and I said in the last bit? And then we're going to bring Javier up here to tell his experience, but we'll stop for a second if there's anything burning in your mind. Just 1 second, Matt will bring you the mic.
Thank you. I'm Judy Smith. I work with HomeShare Oregon. I was actually a student at Portland State, living in one of those subsidized housing things that wasn't torn down for $80 a month. And I don't think I would have made it without it. And it was the 70s. So anyway, thank you, I guess. But here's my question. You know, your College Housing Northwest, you're talking about colleges up here in the Portland area. Do you support, or are you, I I'm just wondering if you're present in any other areas in the state.
So we did have a property at OSU, which we no longer have, but we did have a relationship there. And we're currently talking to colleges in other parts of the state. We don't have programming yet, but we're talking to Chemeketa Community College and to Lane Community College.
Oh, excellent. I'm down in Springfield. Lane County's it's my stomping grounds.
Right.
Well, at some point, I'd love to explore the opportunities we have through home sharing. I know that in Stockholm, Sweden, when they send their students off to college, they don't use dorms. They put them in the homes of senior citizens. And we are finding probably over half the people I talk to that want to share their homes are seniors who want to age in place. So we need to have a conversation.
We'd love to.
But thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
I am astounded by the challenges these students are facing. I think what you're doing is very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and this issue is, as I mentioned with the numbers, 50% of students experiencing housing insecurity. This issue is much bigger than us, right? We need many, many solutions. And I love the idea of home share. We've talked about, co-ops. I think that I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about, housing specifically for students aging out of foster care that could, have their own room, but have more communal living. I think that there's a wide array of things that could happen for students. We're elevating the issue, and we're talking about one of the solutions that we're working on with our ARCS program, but it's much bigger. And we need lots of solutions. And in my opinion, we need more nonprofits focused on college students. We are unique in what we do. There's a lot of for-profits making a lot of money off of college students. And we want to get out there both statewide but nationally to encourage people to consider our model around student housing in a nonprofit. So yes, there's another question.
There's a question from the chat. Is there a chat moderator in here by any chance? No? Okay. Couple of questions. Do folks have to be students to live at your properties?
So they do, but they can be in some kind of workforce training program. They don't have to be college students. And students are, one of the residents in the apartment has to be a student or in some kind of training, but they can live with significant others, friends, children, parents. And they also can take 3 months or a term off a year and not be in school.
And the second question is, after students graduate or if they're not actively enrolled, do they have to move out?
We give them 3 months, and we can have conversation if that doesn't work for them. We aren't rigid in that way. There's ways to appeal that, but we typically give students 3 months after graduation to move out. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Javier to talk about his experiences, and he wants to sit, and I think that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I hope, good morning. I hope nobody minds that I'm sitting down for this. It's just, I'm better at sitting down, I think. So yeah, I landed in the ARCS program, and more specifically in the AMI back in February. Before that, I was living with my grandparents, going through high school and whatnot. But what happened was that, my grandparents were obviously, they're aging, and I think due to the pandemic and due to some constraints, like my grandparents were already working after their age of retirement. So they were struggling a little bit with rent and stuff like that. And obviously, as their grandchild, I was obviously preoccupied with that too, and I didn't want to see my grandparents struggle that much. So I started laying down my options, and it was either working full time at that point and helping them out, or taking part time and figuring it out or whatnot, which wasn't. It really wasn't an idea that my grandparents were really happy about. They wanted me to go to college. They came to this country for me to go to college. They obviously worked really hard to afford, to try to afford some opportunities for me. And so I just started talking to some folks. I reached out to PCC, which is where I was attending and where I'm attending right now. And through this program called Future Connects, which is also at PCC, which it's a program for first generation college students that are planning on transferring after their time at community college. And so through them, I learned about College Northwest Housing and about the ARCS program. And I got in contact with them, and the process was really fast. I think, thankfully there was space back then, and I think they got me in a couple weeks, I would say, maybe 3 weeks at most. So it was really fast. It was really live stream or whatever you might call it. And so yeah, I've been there since then. I've had a really great experience there so far. It's really motivating being around other college students that are in like a similar situation than you. I think to the community that builds, everybody feels a little bit more motivated to do good in their areas of college and whatnot. Like Pam and Ryan were mentioning, something that I didn't have to worry about was paying my first and last month of rent and paying a deposit. And as somebody that didn't even have a rental history back then, I mean, getting into any other apartment would have been very complicated and hard. Before that, I remember looking at a for-profit kind of college place that is near PSU as well. And to get there, I needed a guarantor, and that involves getting family and stuff and credit and all that stuff that wasn't really in my mind. So yeah, through the ARCS program and through College Housing Northwest, I've been able to really focus on being a student. Again, I have to pay my share and whatnot, but I'm getting my work experience too, but I don't have to like really stretch myself thin in order to, meet my bills and pay my rent and all that. I'm able to gain that work experience, pay for the things I have to pay for, and then continue on focusing on what I really am there for, which is college and getting a degree and hopefully paying this forward. So again, it's been a really great experience and I really enjoyed my time here. So
can you tell everyone what you're studying or what you're
Oh yeah, I'm studying communications and journalism, or that's what I want to study. At PCC right now, I'm like taking classes, right, and working towards my transfer degree, but ultimately that's what I want to do. So
and what your job is?
So right now I'm actually working for my old high school. I went to Lincoln High School. And so I'm working there as a near peer mentor, which is, they don't like for us to tell people this, but it really, that's what it is. We're like TAs. They don't like calling us TAs, but that's what we are, and over the summer, actually, in part thanks to the ARCS program, because I didn't have to worry about paying too much rent during the summer, I was able to get an internship for the school district. So I worked in the communications department over there. So I met some cool people over there too. And again, thanks to the ARCS program, I really didn't have to worry about, where am I getting $1,000 during the summer where there's no school, I'm not getting financial aid, and internships really don't pay that much. So again, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you.
Cool.
We have some questions, but I kind of wanted to show this video quickly, and then we're going to take questions for Javier. So we, let's see, I guess I have to end it. We recently had Coin 6 come do a story on ARCS, and we don't have sound, but I'm going to put the mic down here by the by my speaker, and we're going to cross our fingers that y'all can hear. Okay, let's see. Oops. How do I make it big? Hold on. Oops.
Recent studies show more than 50% of college students are experiencing housing insecurity, even homelessness. Now, a newer program here in the Portland metro area that subsidizes rent for students is working to expand this year. So we sent our Elise Haas to find out how they're making an impact on students' lives.
Homelessness among college students goes under the radar, and it comes in many forms, living in cars, shelters, or couch surfing. However, most full-time college students are not eligible for traditional affordable housing programs like Section 8. So what started out as a pilot program in Portland in 2020 is now looking to further prevent homelessness among students so they can succeed.
It'll help alleviate some problems along the way.
Portland Community College sophomore Javier Gomez is a first-generation college student. He came from El Salvador to further his education in communications and journalism.
I was living with my grandparents. I've lived with my grandparents since I came here.
With rents rising in Portland and his grandparents aging, they needed a downsize, and he needed a safe place to go. Luckily, Javier landed here at the Amy in Southwest Portland, where the Affordable Rents for College Students program is subsidizing his payments, cutting costs in half.
I didn't have to, deposit my first and last month of rent. I didn't have to pay an application fee.
By removing barriers, the referral-based program is providing homeless or housing insecure students with stable, affordable housing to help them succeed in college.
A college degree or certificate gets people further down the road to having a living wage job. And if you have a living wage job, you're going to have higher income, pay more taxes, need services left, have better healthcare outcomes.
We have a one-bedroom. This better life will be a reality for Memory Condren, a junior at Portland State University, paying out of pocket for her education. After losing roommates at the start of the pandemic, she and her partner nearly found themselves without an affordable place to live.
And so we panicked.
She's relieved to have been accepted into the ARCS program.
There are a group of people, no matter how privileged they may seem, that like a lot of us work really, really hard to pay for school and to pay for rent. Or our housing like at home is not where we want to be. That's not where we see ourselves growing. And having our own place to find that growth and that safety would be amazing. And not everybody has that opportunity. And ARCS makes that possible.
As these organizations are helping pay the way for these students in need now, the students tell me they'll pay it forward in the future. The ARCS program, along with its primary partner, College Housing Northwest, have grown from subsidizing rent for 20 students to now 55. But that doesn't touch the need. They have 7 students right now that are on their waiting list who are either in shelters or homeless. So the ARCS program is seeking to secure some state funding and one day hopes to subsidize 20% of their 600 available apartments for students. But if you see this as a program that you would like to support, I have included ways that you can donate directly in my article at coin.com.
Thanks. Great, we'll get back. Take this for questions. Yeah.
Hi there. I'm Stacy Sanders, the Director of Policy and Advocacy with Housing Oregon. And my question is, you mentioned that that you would like more affordable housing developers to focus on student housing. So is there any kind of advocacy or legislation that you're putting forth to get people to focus more on this issue, to get more federal dollars, to focus on students? We have the whole Build Back Better legislation. And although we advocated for that at Housing Oregon, student housing was not mentioned. And so how would I facilitate your group in pushing this issue forward?
That's a wonderful question. So we have been doing some partnering, and from my previous job at PCC, I have some connections locally and at the state level. And I am on a statewide committee right now looking at supporting underrepresented students in higher ed. And there's a committee on financial aid and affordability. And I'm hoping that we will propose some legislation around housing there. My voice is there. I'm the only voice, I think, talking about student housing there. Oh, Matt, I'm sorry. Matt's on that committee too. Apologize, Matt. But then on the national level, we have had conversations with Representative Blumenauer's office. I've talked to Senator Merkley's office, and we work with government relations folks at the colleges as well, at PSU and Mount Hood and PCC. So we're trying to all pull in the same direction with the government relations work and collaborate. So I meet monthly with those government relations people since we don't have that ourselves, but I'd love to talk to you another time and maybe bring you into that conversation with those folks. That would be amazing. Thank you.
I was just curious to know, you said one of the barriers for these students is they have no rental history. So when they have lived in your program, does that count as rental history? Yeah?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. That's going to work out well for you.
Right. and we're doing more. So there's a coordinator, and Alicia, who's not here today, but she works directly with the students, and Hillary is another one of our staff. And they're really, they're supporting students, but also coaching them up about the leasing process, right? Learning about a lot of things around what it takes to be renting an apartment, wanting, how you want to leave the apartment so you don't owe anything. there's a lot of learning that happens as part of our program too. It isn't just a housing program. Yeah.
So one of the things that was the reason that blocks students in housing is that the loan with having to go to school. And that's part of it is education has a lot of loans. You get out, you're 22 years old and you have all these loans and you're like in debt and you're starting a job and maybe making 30,000 and then you've got loans to pay off. And that affects housing in the future and it affects housing while you're in school. And is that also something you're kind of looking at is that's why housing put a lot of those things in and it ends up creating more barriers in some aspects because they didn't want to create a system of people being in more poverty. And so is that something you're also addressing in the education? Because that's it's like a whole picture.
Yeah.
I know that it's your housing is a part of it, but also the whole heavy loans, because when you're dealing with people who have disabilities or who are marginalized, I hate using that, they already have one strike against them. Now they've got another strike with loans and now it just keeps getting on top.
Yeah.
So are you also talking about that, saying, hey, there needs to be more funding for people who already have these. Let's give them an ability to have that, because you are doing that with housing in teaching them these things. So are you also addressing that loan aspect in that? Does that make sense?
Yes, I hear you. I want to add, if it's not too personal, are you taking loans for school or do you have to? No. So I want to address that because Javier's in a program called Future Connect that I also worked with at PCC. And one of the things that I don't know that this is the whole reason, but Future Connect, they talk a lot about financial literacy. There's a lot of work up front to make sure. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I can talk a little bit more about it since, I'm talking to financial aid all the time and doing a lot of that. Yeah, I think Portland Community College, at least they do a good job really explaining what a loan is down to the, what a direct and what a subsidized and unsubsidized loan is, what a, prime plus loan is, all that. They're really good at really explaining what it is and what type of agreement you're getting into when you sign a loan. For me, it was through Future Connects, but even it's throughout my check-ins with the coordinator at ARCS. We talk about the needs, and I sit down with, like, let's say my Future Connects coach, and we'll talk about what my needs for the semester are. Is a loan necessary, or can we get the money from somewhere else? Through the PCC Foundation or through scholarships or stuff like that. So I think when I'm at ARCS and when I'm talking to the college housing Northwest people, they really talk about housing because that's their thing. But even within that, again, it's a community, so they'll check in other aspects of my life too, just down to, do you need money are you okay with your tuition this term and all that. So again, they're really a support system where if they don't have that resource, they'll definitely connect me to that resource. And so yeah, it's kind of like it focuses on one thing, but it kind of encompasses a lot of other things.
And I also wanted to say that because I'm working on fundraising, I'm talking to a lot of banks, and a lot of banks do a lot of financial training. And so at some point, as we build our program out, I would like to incorporate, financial literacy and engagement and maybe loan savings plans. What are those for students? There's different savings plans that the banks can promote. I'd love to incorporate that into the programming that we offer as we grow. So I think one more question and then we're going to move forward.
Okay, you know what? I'll let Carol ask. Okay. I won't take it from her. No, I have a question, but I'll ask later.
Yeah, we'll have time.
Perhaps this isn't so much a question as it is a comment. I serve on the Blue Mountain Community College Board in Pendleton. Mm-hmm. So rural community colleges really have a struggle.
Yes.
And I think I applaud everything that's going on here, but I think one thing that we do have to do is to put pressure on our legislature to provide more money for higher education so that the cost for going to college is not so horribly expensive. Mm. And then some of these other things would not be such a tragedy. the first year I went to college, 18 credits, $90, and I didn't have to pay because I was on a scholarship. And it's that students have such barriers now is horrifying to me.
Amen. Totally agree. And we're presenting at the Oregon Community College Association Conference in Sun River in a few weeks. So we'll be talking more to, and we have talked to rural folks as well, and the solutions there are different. So I'm gonna have Lauren and Matt come up now. I'm gonna advance for you. No, do you want me to stay?
Oh, I can stay.
Okay, here, let me stay. Support.
All right, good afternoon or morning still again. So a little bit on Portland Community College. As I mentioned, I'm the Dean of Student Belonging and Wellbeing. And I'll talk more about that division and what it entails in a minute, but a little bit on our students and the housing need that's been experienced specific to Portland Community College. So the data here, just over 2,000 to just over 4,000 PCC students who live within a 5-minute driving distance of a campus are in need of affordable housing. And what's interesting about PCC, we have 4 campuses as well as several other centers across the Portland metro area. Our campuses are in very distinct geographic locations of Portland. So we have one out in Southwest Portland, that's our Sylvania campus. We have a campus in North Portland, which is Cascade, campus in Southeast Portland, right on 82nd and Division, and then a campus out in Hillsborough, our Rock Creek campus out in Washington County. So we're quite spread out. And like our campuses each have sort of a unique identity, the housing issues and the demand for housing and what's around each area is also quite distinctive. And as you can imagine, with something like our Southeast campus, if families have been moved out east from Portland area homes and priced out of those homes and through gentrification, Southeast in particular offers a very unique and distinctive demand for housing and not as many options available for students than there are families and students who need that opportunity. We shared a little bit about Real College. They've been a lifesaver. I do look at them as kind of leading the charge in basic need supports for colleges across the country. So Pam had shared the 2019 data from community colleges in Oregon, and this is specific data from PCC in 2021. And as you can see, 64% of our students experience at least one form of basic needs insecurity, and that could be housing, transportation, childcare, legal services, things like that. And then a little more detail there with relation to housing. 56% of our students reported housing insecurity. And there's some more specifics about what that might entail for the students. And then 19% of our PCC students were experiencing houselessness, including 13% who were in some form of temporary housing until they could find other options. So it's very prevalent. And the more we can get this data out, I'm glad you asked for it, the more the awareness can be there that this is a huge issue that students are facing and that we're facing currently. A little more detail that's disaggregated, so you have a sense, and again, this doesn't come as probably any surprise, but housing disproportionately impacts our communities of color. It disproportionately impacts our student parents, disproportionately impacts first generation students and their first time going to college. And so you can see some of the differences there, including low income. So our Pell recipients, 77% are likely to experience or are experiencing basic needs insecurity versus 55% of non-Pell students. The parent rate is also quite staggering. And then you can see at the bottom there, broken out by specific racial demographics and ethnicities. So a little bit on basic needs for PCC. You know, I have to mention, we had a former president, Mark Mitsui, that really led the charge, I feel like, in the state with an eye on economic mobility and really putting basic needs at the forefront. And through his presidency and certainly over the last couple of years, COVID-19 has only exacerbated and really accelerated our students' experience and their reliance and need for some form of basic needs, and really relying on the college to provide that for them. And I'll mention this in a moment, but it's no longer sort of an if we do this, but it's a must in order for them to be successful in their classes, and for us to really tend to their holistic well-being and sense of belonging at the college and feel like we're looking out for them and supporting them. So a few things we've done to respond to basic needs, and these are more over the last couple of years, I would say, throughout the pandemic. We had a massive expansion of our emergency grant and emergency fund opportunities for students, albeit some of this was through state funding, through the government's emergency aid funding. Some of this was through federal funding, through the Higher Ed Emergency Relief Fund, through COVID. But we distributed millions of dollars of emergency aid to students in all sorts of fashions. And we sort of treated each term as a bit of an experiment to see how we could get money out, whether it was just sending checks and letting students know it's on the way, or asking students to opt in if they needed resources, or having students apply and indicate what they needed and how much and what were they going to use the funds for. So we tried to make those as accessible as possible, including no documentation requirement, just truly asking the student, what do you need, how much, and not really asking them to perform their poverty and have to tell us more than we needed to know to get them the resources we need. Our foundation at PCC raised over $1 million for emergency aid as well. And so we were giving out checks for resources, laptops to students for several terms during the pandemic, just to try to help meet that need. Student advocacy. We've relied on our student government and student leadership to tell us this is a need and we need the college to respond to it. We've been able to take some creative approaches with our student activity fee and use some of those funds generated through students to give it back to students in the form of emergency aid. And that continues to grow and be an opportunity for us. We have a newer House bill, 2835, that provided a benefits navigator role for every single community college in the state. And so it's one person. As you can imagine, that person's very busy, but they're meeting with students and helping them identify various state, local, federal resources that might be an opportunity for them, and walking them through the processes to get those resources in hand. So I think that's helped. Pathways to Opportunity is sort of our basic needs umbrella, and an initiative that we work under to get students connected to those resources. And then, of course, why I'm here with College Housing Northwest today is an expansion of just the housing opportunities. And maybe this is sort of anecdotal, but I am seeing housing and mental health really becoming the prevailing needs. Pam mentioned we have food pantries on every campus. We have a shuttle that goes from campus to campus. I feel like we've done a decent job at tending to those two things. We've got a huge childcare grant we just got for parents needing childcare, housing and mental health, especially through the pandemic. And as we sort of exit or, walk away from the pandemic, those two things are prevailing needs. And so makes partnerships like the one we have with the ARCS program, as well as other housing opportunities. PCC is building a housing unit at our metro location in North Portland that'll break ground in 2023. We're looking at another housing unit through, I believe, Home Forward in our Southeast campus that hopefully will get funded and get built in the next few years too. A little bit about the Division of Student Belonging and Wellbeing. It is a new division for the college. So I've been in this role as dean about 1.5 years. PCC was really ambitious during the pandemic and also went through an all college reorganization. Did not make it easy on ourselves, but reorganized and moved from a Dean of Students model into 5 distinctive student affairs areas, and student belonging and well-being is one of those. And so our division encompasses our identity-based resource centers. PCC has a women's resource center, a queer resource center, multicultural center, and a veterans resource center on every single one of our campuses. And then we also have a Dreamers resource center out in Hillsborough to support DACA recipients and students who have immigrated here to go to school. And so a few of our efforts and what's coming up for the division as we kind of get our feet under us, and we're just returning this quarter. Fall term actually started this week. It is the first term that we are back after being remote, largely remote for the last 2.5 years during the pandemic. And so a lot of just getting used to being in person again and getting familiar with our campuses and our folks. Our division is going to be focused on renewing community partnerships and connections that some of which were lost during the pandemic, and starting to really renew and emphasize and strengthen those things. A few other things we're doing. I need to go quicker.
No, sorry. I thought, did I not?
I might be talking too fast. So we're getting into that again and rebuilding those relationships. We're really focusing on a systemic approach to connecting students to basic needs resources. So I've shared a lot of what we have. What we lack is that network where these things become unavoidable. So it is sort of piecemeal currently. And so we want a better approach. We're looking at right now an intake survey developed through the Seattle Jobs Initiative to get every incoming student at least awareness of what we've got and to see what they need and connect them at the start of their experience. So that's one example, but we have a lot of work to do on making things institutionalized and operationalized. Utilizing the identity-based resource centers. The centers are a great way to reach our BIPOC communities and communities of color and underrepresented communities. And so using those as referral points and ensuring that the staff there are using trauma-informed approaches and are aware of the resources we offer. So we're doing a lot of upcoming training with those teams. We're leveraging technology. We've just adopted chat. So a chat feature that students can get more of a transactional information from us. We've adopted Single Stop, which is a resource acquisition platform that has a map of all different resources in the Portland metro area, as well as a screener tool. So we've just launched that in the last couple of quarters. A continued need for culture shift. And Pam alluded to this a few minutes ago, but truly some folks believe that we should be about academics. Students should come, take their classes and leave, and that's our obligation to them. And that just isn't the case anymore. And you've seen data to show that. So we need to continue shifting the culture at PCC and ensuring that we're aware of these needs and that our faculty and staff can refer students and do it appropriately without causing more harm. And then just more work to uplift student voices and advocacy, like Javier's story, telling those stories, making sure our board of directors, our new president who just started in July, that she's aware of the student experience and we can continue to do something about it once we know. You're fine. Future goals, and this is a hard truth. The first one, the work we are doing is going to continue to fall short of the need. Even with those millions of dollars of federal aid, it never felt like enough. And that was a gift the last couple of years. And so continuing on the hustle, advocacy, federal, state advocacy, continuing to secure grants, continuing to work with our foundation to fundraise. We need to hustle to get the resources we need, and we will continue to fall short because the need is massive. Partnerships and intentional long-term planning around this is really critical. And so we need to make sure that we're connecting with those community organizations, those housing providers, College Housing Northwest, and making that part of what we do. And then just elevating and emphasizing that this is a need that will continue, and again, ensuring our board is aware and can help us in that work. Thank you.
Questions for Lauren? Anybody have any questions? Oh, we're going to run a mic. Thanks.
Okay, so what you guys are doing is amazing, super equitable in regards to the student housing that you have, but these students are going to have to move out at some point in time, and probably more than likely they're going to be renting when they move out. Have you guys thought about preparing them for landlords that aren't equitable? Fair housing training, landlord tenant training? Because most of them are probably going to come up against stuff that they have never experienced before, because you guys are doing an amazing job. Most landlords don't do an amazing job, FYI. So, I mean, have you thought about bringing a program into your program, training them about fair housing laws and landlord tenant laws so they're more educated when they move out in regards to discrimination and whatnot?
I mean, I would say we should. That's a great idea.
It's a very good idea. I'll say that right now. We have I work for the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. With that stated, we are hard pressed to get into dormitories and colleges to do fair housing training. Nobody will call us back. And many of the students that leave college, we then deal with on the back end when they have to go, when they're renting from a landlord saying, I never knew this. I had no idea, you know, so FYI.
I think Javier wants to say something.
It's me again, right? So something that I remember, the first thing that I got as when I first got to the Amy, which is the place, the apartment building, in the part where you can see your documents, there's this thing where they explain to you tenant law, and they also explain to you like what the eviction process is like and all that stuff, which is not necessarily where you want to fall, right? But it is something that, I mean, it's new that I talking to other people, they've never really had where they explain to you your responsibilities and also your rights as a tenant, and also, you know, what the process is like when you rent and all that. So it's not really a class, but those resources are there. I just wanted to put it out. Yeah.
Glad you're here to say that. I don't know all of that. We have one of our board members, Diane, is here too, and so she is also a resident. Other questions for Lauren or general questions that have come up for people before we move on to Matt? Okay, Matt, do you want to sit there or?
That's fine. I know we're running short on time anyways. But I will try to be quick because honestly, I'm the least important person here doing this work. So it doesn't really matter how much I'm talking today, but so I oversee the Youth Experiencing Homelessness program. Before I get into that, I did want to say that I was really impressed with the questions that were coming in today. And there actually are some things that are occurring that kind of deal with a lot of the questions. So it was really exciting to see that there was a correlation and stuff isn't like totally off base. Like, for example, I think there was a question about reducing the cost of university or college for young people. There was a recently passed bill, House Bill 4013, which opens up tuition and fee waivers to young people who are unaccompanied and meet certain requirements or certain categories of what a homeless youth is. 4013. It was a program that is currently operational, but has historically only been for current or former foster youth. This opens this up to young people, again, who fall within a certain age range, were homeless between this age and received services from a contracted service provider. So there's that out there as an ability. It doesn't fix the problem per se, but it is available and it is getting operational as we speak. Additionally, there was conversations around shared housing and around rental agreements and young people not having that. 2 years ago, or I guess a year ago, there was House Bill 2544, which allowed us to open and start a host home demonstration pilot where we are working with community providers across the state who are providing host families for young people. They don't have to be going to college at all, but opening it up for young people to reside in the homes of families, individuals. A lot of them are older families that have spare rooms. So there's that component kind of in that shared housing sphere that is currently being a little bit more worked towards, as well as there's a couple of locations. Oregon, if you're not aware, has a state law that allows young people who are 16 and older or 15 and older if they're pregnant or parenting to sign their own lease agreements. The problem is finding actual landlords and individuals who want to rent to 15 and 16-year-olds are few and far between. So as part of this host home pilot, a couple of programs have for a variety of years now, been creating rental agreements between the young person and the host families. And so allowing a young person who's residing in a supportive hosting situation to gain and sign a rental agreement to live there, so that when they transition out of that host family, they do have some history to say they were a good tenant, that, they followed certain rules, that sort of thing. And so that is another component as well. So it was really exciting to hear those questions come in and to actually have some anecdotal stuff on the back end to talk about too. So I'll be pretty quick with this. My program, again, the Youth Experiencing Homelessness program, is within the Department of Human Services. It's a relatively small program. And by relatively small, I mean, I've been doing it by myself for the last 6 years. And it hasn't even been a full-time position until 2019. I do now have a second person who may be watching on the stream, so I'm calling that out to say that I haven't forgot about her. But it's a relatively small program. My budget, our budget, I got to get used to saying our now. Our budget is about $3.1 million per biennium for the entire state as it pertains to services. So a pretty small amount as it pertains to what we try to do out there. The majority of that funding goes to local organizations across the state to provide a handful of different youth-specific services. Generally speaking, it's street outreach and drop-in day services, shelter services, and job development and mentoring support services. That's kind of just been the history. Recently, with these bills that I talked about before, they came with a little bit additional funding, and we started to expand for a variety of reasons, kind of into more of a medium to longer term housing support component. And so most recently, we've started to do some grants with local providers who are providing transitional living programs. So generally speaking, 12 to 22, 24 months of supported housing, either in a shared living situation or in their own apartments, as well as the host home component that I talked about as well. So the money comes into me, I give that out to local organizations to do the actual good work, and then they provide the services to the young people on the back end. So challenges, it's really hard to limit challenges to one slideshow page. So I was trying to narrow it down to like what would be most pertinent to this conversation, but I think it's important to acknowledge first and foremost that a lot of the challenge when it comes to serving young people in a housing situation or supportive housing situation or not is just the lack of visibility when it comes to unaccompanied homeless youth. Young people, generally speaking, try to stay off the radar. They are most likely not the people that you're seeing on the street, on the corners, that are living in tents on the side of the road. Generally speaking, they're trying to avoid that. They're not wanting to rise to the attention of child welfare becoming involved. They're not trying to get picked up by the police and maybe return back to a situation that they don't feel comfortable or are not safe in. And so when you start looking at numbers and counts, as it pertains to federal counts and even state counts, like numbers are really low as it pertains to like how many young people there are who are experiencing houselessness. The numbers, I think Kristen could probably talk about this, like for youth at the federal level, when you're counting, I think like in Oregon last year or something, there's like 300 or something like that. Like it's such a sad number that it's like almost not even worth mentioning because it paints a picture that there's not an issue. And that's where we run into a lot of challenges. People don't see young people as young people who are on their own as an issue because they're just not seeing them. I'm going to try to go a little bit further. So with my funding, we try to fill gaps. You can stay here. Yeah. The funding does not allow us to fund full shelters or full programs. We're kind of filling the gaps on that. Actually, you can go back one. I'm sorry. And so kind of this piece here, when we're talking about housing generally, kind of that first component about housing kind of historically has started and stopped with shelters, that many people in communities, legislators, people who are kind of not enmeshed in the work feel that if a community has a shelter, then the problem of youth homelessness is solved or can be solved. We know that that's not really the case. A lot of times, like there's a gospel mission in a community, and that's kind of the sole option for an 18, 19, 20-year-old to go for shelter. And oftentimes that's really not a place where a young person wants to go. I don't want to overgeneralize, but there's, some situations there that a young person really probably doesn't want to get connected with or connected to. And so we're working on focusing on expanding shelter specifically for young people with trained individuals who know kind of the trauma of growing up with a lot of instability in their lives. And we think that that expands on, and there needs to be youth specific shelters that go beyond just kind of your standard adult shelter population. But beyond that, what we find is even when you're talking about, yes, having a shelter in a community is great. What happens is young people get stuck in shelter because there are minimal housing opportunities for them beyond that. I'll relay a really quick story. A couple years ago, there was a young person who testified in front of the legislature talking about the need for increased funding for the program and for youth-specific services across the board. And we're kind of highlighting their great connection with a program in Albany, which helps support them through, through school and through a bunch of ups and downs in their lives. And we're commended, and he was commending how they kind of saved his life. And great, sounds great on the surface, but the positive that he was relaying is he stayed in shelter for 4 years. And it's like, that was seen as a positive. And while yes, that can be a positive, that if we're keeping young people and we're putting our thumbs up over a kid stayed in shelter for 4 years, that is complete opposite of what we need to do. And so when there's not housing on the opposite side, when there's not different opportunities for young people, you get stuck in this cycle of shelter for long periods of time, or you get tired of shelter and you're like, well, if there's nothing else out there for me, then I'm out of here. And so that's where we're wanting to put a little bit more of our focus when it comes to our housing piece, is like, we need to get young people out of shelter so that shelter can actually do its job of stabilizing young people who have no place to go, of connecting them to the right resources, giving them a place to breathe, and then moving them into some sort of future housing, be that apartment, be that back with their own family with supports, whatever. We just don't have that, generally speaking, and we haven't had the funds to do that. So we've started most recently to take that conversation around housing to a little bit different level. Last year, we did a long housing investment needs assessment where we spent 6 months going over some data components, to kind of get a better generalization and understanding around like what the true need of not only numbers but cost is for housing young people, and specifically for young people. So we did all of that. The darker part in there, I think there was a couple of components that were really significant. We had up to 60 young people that participated in the assessment, and gave their perspective and thoughts and ideas. And I really think that some of the decisions that were made were a direct result of their involvement. Some of the things that they mentioned is their challenges with voucher access, that oftentimes, they get placed on a wait list when they turn 18 or 19 years old, and they're told, this wait list is 2 years, and they're looking at that and saying, I don't have 2 years. I don't have 2 years to wait. I don't have 2 years to go anywhere, and I'm not going to stay in shelter for 2 years. And so I am going to just try to make myself however that can go. And so they talked about kind of their need for that and their struggles with that. They talked about housing and cash access versus just the provision of services. Generally speaking, DHS as a whole provides a lot of services, but they were saying, really, it's great that the state wants to support and build shelters and build, job development components and build street outreach and day drop-in services. But sometimes what I need to get out of homelessness is a place to go. Like, it's not, you can service me to death, you can connect me with everybody, but at the end of the day, even if those relationships are great, if I don't have an actual living situation to go to, it still sucks. And also the same thing about sometimes also some young people are like, what I actually need is a little bit of cash on hand. I'm working, I'm going to school. Every single dollar that I make and every hour that I'm awake is either education or work, and I cannot get ahead. And so there's a lot of young people who are saying, you know, all it's going to take is one thing. It's going to take my job closing for 2 weeks because of a pandemic situation. It's going to take my, you know, in my neighborhood right now, like there's a restaurant that has a lot of young people that work there. They had to cut back on Tuesdays because they're not open on Tuesdays anymore. So I know that some of those young people had their hours significantly cut, and that can really get in the way of like being able to maintain your own living situation. And so sometimes you just need cash and actual dollars at hand to be able to not fall into homelessness or to exit a shelter. Also wanting to highlight to desiring opportunities out of their control. And what they mean by that is, you know, oftentimes it's why we changed the name of the program from the Runaway and Homeless Youth Program, which is kind of placing a descriptor on young people, to young people experiencing homelessness, because homelessness is something that can actually be transitioned out of. Was, you know, a lot of young people who are on their own are being met with barriers because they're LGBTQ and have been kicked out of their house, because they have left because there's abuse or drugs or unsafe situations in the home, or they live with younger siblings and the mom is going into a shelter with the younger siblings, but the 15-year-old male, he can't go there. And so he's out on his own. Like, there's a lot of things that are not in these kids' control, that is basically they're being blamed for taking themselves out of those situations. So really wanting to highlight, we deserve these opportunities, not as like a, hey, you know, like we're a population itself that like needs this, but like the need is for stuff that we don't have any control over, and we're getting blamed or we're getting barriers put up because of it. So that all brings us to actually what we're here to talk about today, and what we talked about today through this conversation about housing and some of the shifts that we're working on that. We partnered with the Oregon Housing and Community Services. They had some funding for homelessness prevention and homelessness response, and we agreed on an interagency agreement where they sent me our program $9 million to do some specific work with. The great part is that it opened up a lot of opportunities. The sad part is, with a lot of these opportunities and all this funding that has come in recently, all expires at the end of the biennium. And so it will be very interesting to see what happens. But one of the things that we did do with this was partner with College Housing Northwest and the ARCS program. I don't even remember how we connected. It was super randomly, and then stuff just happened so quick. But I think it's ARCS Plus, where we are allowing up to 25 young people free rent in College Housing Northwest properties through the end of the biennium. And it was not surprising, but also kind of surprising as well. I'm a state person. Stuff does not happen quick ever. So to like have a contract from discussion to now, like I think the contract was finalized in July, and I think all units will be full by the end of this month. Like 25 young people legitimately housed, moved from out of shelter, moved into a stable location in a quick turnaround is like frightening. I mean, frightening in a good way, but like, wow, you can actually do this. It's actually pretty cool to do that. So really exciting. And we're hoping to continue that sort of work, because this sort of thing needs to happen. And I also say this is College Housing Northwest. We're talking about education, and Pamela mentioned it briefly, but we are talking about young people who are finishing their GED, who are wanting to progress their education, who are wanting to get into workforce. It's not just college. I mean, ultimately, that's I think where we want to strive towards. But I also think like how many young people there are living on the streets, living in shelters, that can be college students, want to be college students, who are not college students because they don't have the housing and ability and means to actually do it. So yeah, you can go ahead. Yep. So these are just some numbers. Just really quickly, that assessment turned out that there's about 8,300 young people from between the ages of 18 and 24 who are in need of safe and stable housing each year. This does not necessarily mean we need 8,300 youth-specific apartment units. I would think that would be great, but this is kind of the full array of housing. Not every young person needs the same level of housing. So we're talking about, you know, we need to expand our host home components. We need to expand the ability for young people to have youth specific apartments. We need to have, you know, in my opinion, vouchers that are specifically for young people to access that are not in a larger pot. So, but overall, we're talking about, you know, a significant amount of young people who are in need of housing supports. We also have pretty historically high numbers across the country as it pertains to not only young people who are homeless and experiencing homelessness independently, but also those who are unsheltered as well. So yeah, we can probably skip this slide. That was, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. We'll have a couple minutes for questions in a minute. I do remember meeting Matt. We happened to be in a Zoom meeting together, and I explained what we were doing. And then a few hours later, he emailed me and said, "What do you think you could do with $500,000?" And I said, "Oh, what?" And then it's, you know, it's evolved from there. I think that was in February, but yeah, it's pretty great. It's a pretty great email to get. So we're just going to wrap up real quick and then take any questions you have. This is just some things to think about. Half of students living off campus, apart from family, have incomes below the poverty level. And 70% of community college students work while in college, and a third of them work full time. And then just to end kind of in actions, like what can we do? And there's some legislation out there to amend LIHTC, which is, again, that's a long-term game, but we'd love to see that. And then doubling the Pell Grant is also an effort out there. I don't know if y'all are familiar with what the Pell Grant does, but the amount of the Pell Grant hasn't changed in 20 some years. I think it's $6,000. So doubling that would be a huge impact. Of course, supporting our program to provide more subsidies and more nonprofits like us. So I mentioned that. And then Ryan, the Homeless Children and Youth Act, is that something you want to talk about or quickly?
Yeah, that's a federal, I think that's federal legislation. And it basically, my understanding is it amends some of the language or some of the definitions that HUD has around homelessness to align with other federal definitions of homelessness in order to be more inclusive towards youth and families.
Great, thanks. So any last minute questions? We're kind of 2 minutes. We've got 2 minutes till we're supposed to end. We're happy to stay here and answer questions too, if you have them. Any questions for Matt? Yes.
Just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody for all your good work on this, and wanted to make a plug for FYI, if that's okay. The Foster Youth to Independence program is, Matt mentioned that one of the challenges that they learned in the housing needs, or the needs assessment from last year, is that youth are finding that it's difficult to access vouchers. So there's a specific voucher for former foster youth or youth aging out of foster care. And so if you work with a former foster youth, or if you work with a foster youth aging out of foster care, come speak with me, because there's a relatively low barrier program that provides vouchers to those youth. It's one that can be utilized more in the state. So definitely want to mention that. Thanks.
Thank you. Really important. Thanks for your attention. And if you have interest in what we're doing or want to partner, we're always looking for conversations. Or if there's someone else that you know that you can refer us to, that'd be great. I have some cards if anybody wants my card. Thanks for being here.